Welcome everyone to Education Week's webinar, Deepening and Strengthening Teacher Education, underwritten by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. I'm Stephen Sawchuk, an assistant editor here at the newspaper. You should be seeing a fairly dreadful picture of me come up on your computer screen in a moment. There it is. All right, so teacher education is quickly becoming one of the hottest topics on the education beat today. Increasingly, states and districts are wondering whether teacher ed programs are ready to turn out graduates who can model effective teaching practices the minute they're in the classroom. On the policy front, outside monitors are conducting a controversial review of every single teacher ed program. The Federal Education Department has announced plans to re-regulate Title II, the section of the Higher Education Act that governs teachers' colleges. And accreditors in the United States are pushing for much more student teaching practice and coursework that's slimmer and more relevant. So you might think about this the way I do. All of the institutional baggage in K-12 education meets all of the institutional baggage in higher education. Fortunately, to help us sort through all of this today, we have two fine guests. First, we have Mary Kerner, the fearless dean of Arizona State University's Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. ASU has begun to include a year-long student teaching experience, a total revamping of the content coursework for undergraduate education, and the adoption of a teaching framework for guiding student teaching. And second, we have Deborah Ball, the Dean of the University of Michigan's School of Education. Her teacher education program has been praised by U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, among others. The program is known for helping candidates practice specific skills and for developing assessments to measure them. After we hear from our guests this morning, we'll have a Q&A and discussion period of about 20 minutes. We want this webinar to be an interactive experience, so please feel free to ask questions at any time during the hour we have. Just type into the Ask a Question window on your webinar display, and we'll do our best to address as many questions as possible in the time allowed. Also, this webinar will be available on demand within 24 hours of today's event, and the PowerPoint slides will be available for download. You'll be receiving an email with a link to the archive and slides once they're ready. You'll also be able to access the webinar archive from our homepage at www.edweek.org. Now let's start with Mary of ASU. Welcome, Mary.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're so thrilled to have you, so take it away.
Okay. We're going to begin with President Michael Crow's kind of statements about what we should be doing in the College of Education. Because at ASU, we think that teacher education has to be a university effort. It has to come from the president, the provost, other colleges, arts and science. It's a team effort, if you will. So Michael says we're unwilling to accept this notion that it's the school board's fault, the state funding model's fault. We are responsible, at least in part, for the outcomes of the K-12 enterprise. And that's how we feel, that we understand it's a complicated school world out there, but we have to prepare people who are ready to enter and be successful in that world. There was a people use the word transformational fairly easily, but I have to say, here at ASU, we had a structural transformation that strengthened the mission of teacher education and of the College of Education's research agenda. There were 3 colleges of education at Arizona State University. They were geographically close, and within 2 years, the president and the Board of Regents decided to merge those 3 colleges into one, and that college is the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College, so that we have a single, stronger, research level 1 College of Education, which pays strong attention to teacher education, and which serves the local community of Arizona. We have a very, very, very important mission that located in Arizona, we are indeed the major source of teachers for the schools in K-12. We also focus on researching teacher education and its impact on pre-K through 12. I wanted to give you a little idea at a glance of how big we are. So this tells you our enrollment. We have 6,200 students in the college. So when you talk about scaling up, we feel that if we can scale up these programs for our students, we certainly can develop models where other colleges would scale up fewer students. We ranked 25th among public graduate schools in U.S. News and World Report, 35th among all public and private graduate programs, and it's been ranked one of the best colleges of education for the last 12 years. Although we've undergone reorganization, we have kept the programs, faculty, and courses that ASU has had for many years. And what do they focus on? Well, the university mission is that we need to be embedded, socially embedded in the community. I think it's really important for teacher education programs to be part of the university's mission. You can't do it alone. You can't be isolated. You can't be like a little, like a little irrelevant feature out there. So the president has made us part of the challenges, of the problems at ASU. I would encourage you to look at the website. And the new teacher has become one of the challenges for the entire university to address and to begin to solve. On the university mission and social embeddedness, we've established PDS sites all over the state. We started this 12 years ago. And so these are very mature partnerships on tribal lands, in urban areas, and in places like Scottsdale, in upper middle class and middle class areas. We think partnerships, real authentic partnerships with reciprocity, are at the core of what we do. We have a clinical model of teacher preparation, I Teach AZ, which Stephen wrote about in Ed Week. It's a full year of student teaching with coursework delivered on site. Begins the first day, ends the last day. We're learning a lot about that. We have put 2 full-time instructors on site who they don't supervise once or twice or 3 times a semester. They're there every day with their student teachers. Our goal is that our undergraduates who come to ASU, not an elite group of kids, who are academically fine, will in the end of the year be equivalent to a second-year teacher. We have curriculum reform on the bottom. We've reduced willingly 25% of our education courses. That means we've taken 25% of our courses out of our major and indeed replaced them with especially redesigned courses that teachers need tied to the Common Core curriculum. We are working intensely with arts and science to do that. And we're collecting data. There was an initiative called T-PREP, originally funded by the Arizona Community Foundation for the 3 Regents universities. It has been continued only by us with a special presidential initiative. Some of the results we got from that actually made us seriously look at our clinical practice, and that was one of the reasons we doubled student teaching based on that data. So, nobody believes everything's a good story, right? Especially in teacher education. So we have a lot of challenges, and I don't think our challenges are unique to ASU. One of them is which schools do we put our students in and which classrooms? We have serious memos of understandings with districts. They need to take 30 of our student teachers, and we wrestle with the fact that we know from history, from experience, if we only put teachers in high-performing schools, they will not work in schools of high poverty. And so we are putting our students in grant-supported schools, which are high poverty, and our traditional schools. We are calling them I Teach AZ to mask what the funding is. The funding's irrelevant. The program remains the same. But it is a constant question as to what teachers, how do you know what the capacity is? We have a 4-day workshop for all mentor teachers. But in a partnership, do we get to dictate to the school which teacher that they use? We also put 2 student teachers in a classroom to try to establish peer review. A big thing we're really talking seriously about is expert knowledge versus experiential knowledge. Who gets to say what's in a course syllabus? The tenured faculty, the clinical faculty, many of whom have terminal degrees, who reside in these professional development schools. I mean, this is very apparent in literacy courses. I think the discussion is important. I don't think it's a slam dunk that it's either one or the other. And I think this idea that it's a bimodal kind of distribution or a dialectic, it's either or tenured faculty or clinical faculty, we are setting up an infrastructure where those conversations have to happen on an ongoing basis. Selection and mentor teachers I've already talked about. And also, what's the potential for jobs after graduation? We think iTeach actually is addressing those. Last year we did a pilot study, and all of our teachers from the iTeach sites got hired by the districts. iTeach AZ is our year-long clinical piece of our program, and it's what Stephen wrote about in Ed Week. It's embedded in school reform. It's clinically enhanced. We use teacher assessment performance, Milken Foundation. It requires 4-day training. 100 of our faculty have taken that because that assessment is not only for teachers in schools, our teacher candidates in schools, but it's beginning to push up through the entire program. And, of course, we're dependent on school partnerships. So this is a quote by David Shaw, one of our superintendents, who says the people he hired from iTeach are actually equivalent to second-year teachers because of the experiences they've had. So some of the features of iTeach AZ are not radical. It's a lot of hours in clinical with a lot of intensive supervision by us, training for cooperating teachers, and working with the schools to look at their curriculum. I would say most of the superintendents feel that this is also professional development for their teachers. Along with this, ASU is a very big place. We bring additional resources. Engineering is working with us, sending students to teach student teachers and teachers how to do lesson plans with engineering in it. Our technology people are beginning to develop interactive digital learning games in those sites. Some are doing tests and research in those sites. So the more we feel we can bring, including research on what we're doing and what's going on in schools, the richer the experience will be and the better the school will be for themselves and for us. The rollout plan, as you can see, we had 500 pre-service teachers in fall 2011, 29 partner school districts all over the state. We're adding 250. And, of course, there are complicated MOUs for everyone to understand what the expectations are. The full-year student teaching, the reason we did it was insufficient to simply extend time in classrooms. We didn't just add time. We changed the relationships with the districts to be mutually responsible for our students. One of the things we did, which was not received well, is we used to give a cash stipend to mentor teachers, and we stopped that. We tell the district if they want to reward or give some payment to their teachers for taking a student teacher, that's great, but our contribution is the clinical person because it's very expensive, and so we've taken those fees and turned them into real people who are actually on site, which we think is a better outcome for the schools and for our program. And as I said, we are trying to figure out how we determine the capacity of all schools for the placements of students in schools that are not succeeding. We think it's our responsibility to pay attention to that, to work with all schools. What measuring outcomes? How are we going to know what we're doing is the right thing to do? One of the things is interactive digital learning. We are now creating, with Sasha Barev and Anna Arici, an interactive game. I think this will be the area where we revolutionize, really change how we do things in teacher ed. This will be students will get avatars. They will follow themselves through a game for 2 years. They will download real-life video. They will make choices in a safe environment. We will assess students, and there will be time for reflection, which increasingly the research that Sasha and others are doing show there's actually ample time for reflection. That's one of the ways we're going to begin to actually assess our student teachers. We have T-Prep, Teacher Preparation Research and Evaluation Project. I've already talked about it. It is following our teachers into schools the first year. We need a statewide longitudinal data system, which the state is working on with the superintendent, John Huppenthal. And we use TAP, the Teacher Assessment Advancement Program. And this was in one of our grants, and we have now extended. We have integrated that grant into our program. And the candidate as well as teachers are given feedback. So all of our clinical people, many of our tenure track people are actually well-versed in TAP. These are the TAP assessments. You can Google TAP and see what is involved in it. And initiatives and challenges. Reduce education courses by 25% in order to add more courses in arts and science. We knew we could not just say you have to take more of Chemistry 101 because Chemistry 101 may be extremely irrelevant to what you're going to teach. We are creating in a program in collaboration with Arts and Science, Resets, Lee Hartwell, a Nobel Prize winner, is actually doing the course in sustainability, exploration, discovery. These courses integrate science and address the national science standards. They will have extractable modules, which these students can then use this technology in their own classrooms when they enter schools. It's a very exciting project, and we are now talking to another company that will help design the architecture for these courses. And we're doing this increasingly with math, with English, with history, so that we can begin to have really rigorous courses. Our reputation is growing in rigor. We didn't even have to change the admission standards. The reputation that we were more rigorous. We had many students drop out of student teaching, and we had 125 come in from arts and science. Our goal is to attract strong students who actually were discouraged by what they perceived as weak education programs, kind of the reputation that teacher ed and colleges of ed have. And we're hoping to change that to attract actually more professional students and a better academically set student. The last thing is our resources. We received $77 million in federal grants. The first grant was to establish its teacher quality. We established relationships with community colleges to create general ed courses. We created a data office that will, we think, evolve into a research office about schools, data about schools. And the second grant is a TIF grant, Teacher Incentive Fund, to pay teachers based on the assessment from TAP. The first payout went this spring. As you can imagine, these are working with districts very closely because this is changing the culture of districts. And we received a $19 million investment from philanthropist T. Denny Sanford. We're working with Teach for America to take their best practices in recruiting, in curriculum, in professional development, and figuring out how they can be integrated to strengthen our program. So the last thing I want to leave you with is the ongoing challenges, the role of theory versus practice in alternative tracks and traditional tracks, the role of research in we have elite doctoral programs that David Berliner, Alfredo Artiles are heading them up. And how do we shape those programs to continually give feedback to our own college and to the K through 12, K through 16 environment, and how to continue to define and measure good teaching.
All right, Mary, thank you so much for all of that. I mean, it's certainly a lot to chew on, and so we'll get to dig in the Q&A section into some of those features. Before we move on to our second panelist, we just wanted to mention that if you're interested in other Education Week events, we do have a live event coming up in April 2012, Scaling Up Student Success. This is an interactive day where you will join education leaders to talk about the effective management of schools district-wide, and you can save $20 by registering early using the promo code WEBINAR20. If you go to the EdWeek website and click on Live Events, you'll find more information. Now we turn to Deborah Ball from the University of Michigan, and let's hear about what they're up to in Michigan. Deborah?
Thank you so much, Stephen. Stephen?
A brief moment before we get Deborah on the line.
Okay. Stephen, should I start?
Yes.
Okay.
It's
I'm
all you.
I'm delighted to be here today, and the headline for what I'm going to talk about as I explain what we've been up to at the University of Michigan can be seen on my first slide. Great teachers aren't born, they're taught, and I hope that by the time I'm finished explaining what we've been up to here at the university, it will be clear why that's the headline for what we're up to. I wanted to just first give a little bit of framing for what we see as the critical problems and what led us here to take this on. And then I'm going to give the key features of the program that we've been developing here at the University of Michigan, and then briefly talk about our next steps. When I talk about the we here at the university, I'm talking about a large segment of tenure-track faculty and clinical faculty who have extensive experiences in schools, as do many of our tenure-track faculty, along with a bevy of graduate students and teachers, practitioners in schools who've been working together on what I'll be describing today. So first, I think it's worth noticing that there really are two critical problems in this country that are pervasive and of long standing. The first is that overall in this country, teaching quality and skill are weak. And the second that's highly related to that is that professional preparation and, in fact, ongoing professional development have historically had extremely weak impact on improving the quality of teaching practice. But at the same time, the promise or the hope that we see is that social science research has repeatedly helped to show that skillful teaching has significant impacts on student learning gains, even in the same schools in which teachers face challenges in terms of resources, of parental or family involvement, and the like. Individual teachers can have powerful effect on student learning gains, and that gives us enormous hope that the second is actually true as well, which is although teacher training has often not had a significant impact, it is possible to create training that could enable the very large number of people who do teaching in this country to do really excellent work and to be among those who have this kinds of impacts on student learning. So when we try to analyze why is it that, in fact, although there are many, many examples of teacher education in this country and even more examples of professional development, why is it that this system has had such a weak impact? And really the answer is that there isn't a system. And I just tried to summarize briefly what we came to understand about why there is no system. The first is that there is no common curriculum for the preparation of teachers. There's no agreed upon set of professional standards for exactly what people should know how to do in order to begin teaching or to develop their teaching. These agreements exist only at an extremely global level, but not at the kind of level of detail that would be necessary to build a system. There are a vast number of providers, both at the initial training level and an ongoing development, both in institutions of higher education and in the bevy of non-traditional providers. There's no shared standard about what people should be able to do to begin practicing independently on young people. And the assessments that exist in this country, although there are some, tend to focus either on written assessments of knowledge or observation by a wide range of people who may not share any particular standards for what to look for, or increasingly portfolio-based assessments that often are underspecified and draw as much on candidates' ability to talk about or reflect on their practice as to actually carry it out. So we also have a weak entry or gateway standard to know whether people have the skills necessary to teach. And what this all adds up to is that we have a long history in this country in which individual experience and firsthand on-the-job ongoing experience as a teacher, individual interactions with other colleagues are the primary source of influence on teachers' practice. This is nothing like a professional system. I'd like to just show an example of a contrast. On this slide here, I included photographs from a number of different kinds of professions and skilled trades. And my main point here is that from everything from hairdressing to electrician's work to midwifery to flying planes and to surgery, each of these, and they vary substantially in the kind of professions or occupations they are, each of them has done something that teaching has never done, and that is three basic things. One, to specify the specific capabilities that are necessary for practice in this field. Second, a system for providing those capabilities to professionals and to systematically allow them to gradually attain more and more structured experience and practice with those skills. And third, a system of evaluating whether people are prepared for independent, responsible practice. It should be embarrassing to us in the education profession that we don't yet share a standard that's higher than that hairdressers or pilots or electricians or any of these professions has. But that, in fact, is the core of the problem. And when we here at the University of Michigan contemplated those problems, we thought it was worth taking on. That is, our hope for the enormous impact of teaching led us to think that the problem of developing a professional training system was one of that perhaps there was no more important problem to be tackled in this country if what we care about is students' opportunities and outcomes. We also noticed when we reviewed the fact that we were hardly the first players. We have lots and lots of examples in our history as a field of efforts to try to reform or improve teachers' training and their development. We noticed some patterns. First, we noticed that most teacher education reform, both in the past and currently, has focused far more on structure than on the actual curriculum of teachers' training. So when I say structure, I mean things like how long the program is, how it's structured, how it's laid out, how much time candidates spend in school, with whom, and what kinds of schools. We also noticed that there have been improvement efforts that focus on requirements, for example, the different kinds of controversies and discussions that have occurred over time about how much mathematics teachers ought to take and what courses they ought to have. And you could think of that as curriculum, but it really is often much more about specifying at a rather large level the sorts of knowledge or kinds of coursework that people should take. We also see, and this is probably increasingly true, that other kinds of reform have been less about the content or the nature of training and much more about the quality of the people who enter the training. So there's a considerable interest in recruiting better candidates, which is another way to improve a program, but it isn't necessarily focusing on the curriculum and the outcomes. So what we saw overall is that there's been substantially less attention to the nature of teaching practice itself and what the necessary level of performance is that would be required for somebody to be able to be responsible for students' learning. And we deemed that to be a critical issue, a most important problem, that if what we care about is students' opportunities to learn, then looking at the nature of practice and its demands ought to guide our effort to build a new approach to the training of teachers. So when we thought about what we learned from looking at training in other skilled trades, other professions, we noticed that there were three basic features, and we used those to design our approach to what we would call strong training for responsible practice as a teacher. But what I want to point out is that these are the same features that we see in other fields. The first is to specify clearly the nature of the practices necessary for skilled and responsible work with clients, in this case students. So that means that specific skills, capabilities, qualities of performance, and the like that are necessary for basic independent practice. The second is that all of these successful training, and ours would need to be the same, detail the kind of developmental clinical training that progresses from supported work in observing skilled practitioners and peripherally participating in examples of practice, studying it on video and other things, to moving on to supervised independent practice. So very specific ways of thinking about the clinical training. And finally, consequential and real performance assessments of those specific capabilities, both ongoing to help candidates improve, but also culminating to determine their readiness for professional practice. So these three features we saw as common among successful professions and skilled trades, and they form the basis of what I'm going to describe. So first, let me talk about what we call high-leverage practices. We defined high-leverage practices to be those things that are necessary for basic, by that I mean entry-level and responsible academic instruction in the Common Core State Standards and in the other academic subjects in which we prepare teachers. We also deemed to be a high-leverage practice those things that are fundamental to managing effectively the environments of teaching practice, classroom management, working with parents, working with colleagues. Third, those practices that are specific enough to be named, identified, and taught in a very specific way, not in a global way, not things like differentiating instruction, but actually what are the actual strategies and techniques that one does to do that. And finally, those practices that could actually be assessed directly by watching a candidate at work. So some examples. These aren't all of them. We have a relatively short list of them, and this is a subset of those. but I hope this helps to illustrate the kind of thing that we mean and why we think of these as working at a grain size or a size that's smaller than the big domains that are actually much more familiar to us, like planning instruction or managing the classroom. Here we've actually staked a claim on specific practices that we think are fundamentally necessary before someone should be allowed to practice independently, and then we set out to design a program that would enable us to prepare beginner teachers to do these exact things wrapped around content. So, for example, you see some that are classroom-based, like explaining core topics, posing questions about those topics, but you can also see some here that while they involve content area, knowledge, and skill, they're also more general, like conducting a meeting about a student with a parent or a guardian, setting up and managing small group work. But a signature of our program is to wrap these around academic content, since the fundamental responsibility of teachers is to enable students opportunities to learn and become skillful in a wide range of academic and other social skills. I wanted to give a couple of examples of what I mean when I say wrapping these around content, and in this case I chose to use examples from English, language arts, and mathematics, but we do prepare teachers obviously in other content areas as well. But consider when I said explaining core content, what we mean here is being able to explain what a real number is in a 9th grade algebra class to students who are still struggling with fractions. That's what we mean by a high leverage practice. We want beginning high school teachers to know how to do that, and that's what we focus our program on. We want secondary English teachers to be able to launch and conduct a productive discussion of a major theme in Romeo and Juliet. And we want elementary teachers to, for example, be able to work on a very specific reading skill with a small group while the rest of their class is able to work productively. So it's at a very specific level of practice in the classroom connected to the core content. I want to move on now to say a few things about what I mean by detailed clinical training. We were quite struck that clinical training, while everyone agrees it's important, suffers from the same problem that many other things do in education, in which we talk more about seat time than we talk about the content or outcomes. And so we determined that although we all agree that teachers who are learning need to spend lots of time out in schools, that what we wanted more to focus on is what was the nature of the guidance and the nature of the experience that they needed to have that would allow us to say that the experience they were having was educative. So some examples of what we've been developing include things like deliberate guided learning from skilled teachers, in which groups of interns move around to specific classrooms in which there are teachers who are particularly skillful at one or another of our high leverage practices. And those teachers, much the way medical interns learn, watch those teachers carry out those practices in groups, have opportunities to discuss very detailed aspects of the way the teacher works, and they then in other placements are practicing those same skills during that same period of time. We also understand that practice sometimes needs to be harnessed, and we've made very productive use and are still developing ways to increase our candidates' ability to study very specific kinds of practice in specific settings through the use of videos and other primary records. Some of our faculty have developed, and from which we're all now developing and learning ways to use, rehearsals in which interns try out specific lessons and techniques before they actually try them out on real students. It's notable to us that in other fields, the safety of the client is paramount when beginners are learning to work, and yet somehow in teacher education we've thought that it was fine to have children be practiced on by people who are still fumbling. So we've practiced and developed a technique in which we allow interns to rehearse a lesson, rehearse giving directions, rehearse an interview with a parent or an assessment with a student before they try it out, where they can get feedback from their instructors and their classmates before they're actually inflicting that on children. We've developed rubrics providing detailed feedback to our interns on these specific practices as they try them out in experience. And overall, we would describe our approach to clinical training as systematic and staged with supervision and feedback over time, starting with less complex and moving to more and more integrated and complex experiences with practice. Finally, we've been working on developing assessments of these teaching performances, and we think of them as functioning in two ways. One, that throughout our program we will be using and are using these assessments to help us and our interns understand the progress they're making as they work on the specific high leverage practices in their placements and in the work that they do with us. We use them thus formatively, and we also build them as culminating performance assessments. Unlike portfolio assessments, our assessments focus on specific practices. I'm going to give an example in a moment. Some of these are conducted in real classrooms. For example, leading a whole class discussion is something we would want to watch an intern do with a specific piece of content that we would specify, whereas other kinds of things are ones in which we want to present examples deliberately. For example, we might want to assess our candidates' capacity to recognize common patterns of student thinking, which is one of our high leverage practices. For that, we would present multiple examples of student work and ask our candidates to explain what students are doing in each of those examples. Waiting around in the classroom for a candidate to see the different examples that we'd like to assess is fruitless. And finally, we've also been experimenting successfully with using the standardized patient protocol that medical schools use, in which deliberately prepared parents or students act out roles while our candidates have to practice specific techniques, for example, a parent-teacher conference or assessing a student. And I'd like to give an example of the use of that next. Here is an example very similar to an assessment that we used at the end of the first year of our elementary undergraduate program. These assessments don't occur at the course level, but are at the level of the program, so that students are demonstrating the developing skill they're mastering across the different kinds of clinical and course-based experience. So here's an example in which we first presented candidates with a problem and a simulated student. The student presents this work. Here you can see a case where the student's answer is incorrect. You would expect the answer to be 56. And we ask candidates what it is that they would notice about the student's work and what they would ask. We then move on to a more complicated example where the student's answer, the child's answer, is actually right. And what we're assessing here is whether our interns can elicit from the student how the student solved the problem in a way that helps them to understand whether the student does or does not understand the mathematics. This is a fundamental practice because when students present correct answers, too often beginning teachers assume that they understand. And what we were assessing here was, had our interns developed the eliciting skills that would enable them to quickly diagnose and determine whether the child did or did not understand the mathematics. The simulated student responded to questions as the intern posed them, and we were able to learn in great detail the differences among our interns and the skill level they had reached and their ability to ask questions. After the intern had asked as many questions as he or she thought they needed to ask within a 3-minute period, we then asked them to predict how a student would have responded to the problem 18 plus 29 plus 17. And in the cases where they had elicited well, they predicted that the student would answer 64, and when they hadn't elicited well, they predicted 50. When they elicited well, they predicted 64, and when they hadn't elicited well, they predicted 54. I'm still saying it backwards. It's the opposite. And I'll show you why. Here, what they needed to figure out is that the student, the child, was actually carrying a 1 no matter what. And in the case of the problem that they were looking at here, too, 8 plus 9 is 17 plus 7 is 24. But in fact, when they hadn't actually elicited what the child was doing, they predicted 64, which is the correct answer, not realizing that the student had misunderstood that you don't simply carry a 1 no matter what your total is. So in this simulated assessment, we were able to get incredibly good information about our candidates' eliciting skills in a very short period of time across all of the interns in our program. And what I like about this example is it helps to illustrate concretely that while some assessments of performance need to occur in real time in classrooms, many others are being developed in formats that fit the authenticity of the actual demands of the work. And so we're not tied to proving that every assessment occurs in real time, but rather that the assessments we develop are actually of the performances that we care about holding ourselves and our candidates accountable to. I want to close by just saying the next steps that the faculty here at the University of Michigan faces, and that is that we have, in the last couple of months, announced the launch of a new organization called TeachingWorks. And TeachingWorks is an organization that will enable us to not only harness what we're learning in our own program so that we can share the high-leverage practices, the methods of preparing teachers to carry those out, the methods of clinical training and the assessments, but will enable us to work with other organizations that are similarly engaged in this endeavor. Here on this slide, I summarize what the main arenas of our work are, including advancing the development of a common professional core for teaching. At the beginning of my presentation, I explained that I think this is one of the principal things that we're missing in our profession is a common agreement about what is necessary for skilled professional practice, that we will be working to create and distribute resources with others for a comprehensive practice-based curriculum. We know there are big issues about the training that those who work with teachers require in order to do the kind of coaching, rehearsals, feedback that we're learning to do here, and we'll all need to continue learning that. kind of practice ourselves as teacher trainers, mentors, and coaches. And finally, Teaching Works will be conducting and using research on teaching and on the professional training and assessment of teaching and the relationships of all of those to student learning gains, so that the warrants we have in our profession for why we do what we do can be strengthened from the way in which we are right now. So Teaching Works will base its work on the program I've been describing today, but Teaching Works has as its agenda also to provide leadership in the country for reversing the problems with which I began this presentation, that is, the evidence that teaching has effects and the simultaneous side evidence that teacher preparation has weak effects. We set out to prove to ourselves and to work with others on building a system which could ensure that every student in this country would have a well-prepared teacher who could actually take responsibility for and ensure that students' learning gains in a school year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for your presentation. We have about 20 good minutes for Q&A, so we're just going to start right off with a good question here. This one is, what is teacher preparation's role in ensuring quality membership in the profession of teaching? What are your standards for entrance, your standards for program completion, and how frequently do you fail students or deny them a license or a degree?
I think we have the luxury in teacher education to vet students over a long period of time, 2 years. And what's interesting to me is that our reputation has grown, as I said before, in rigor. And so people applying are different, and people who are leaving are actually, there's more people leaving, with the idea that teaching is not a fallback profession, that this isn't something you do just in case you can't get a job somewhere else. I like to say, if you can't become a teacher, you can always become a lawyer. And I think that what we're doing is working with Teach for America to look at qualities of perseverance, but also to make sure that the admissions is actually through rigorous coursework in content, as Deborah said, being able to think critically. And we put a lot of students on professional improvement plans because of their professional attitudes, professional behavior, knowledge of content, ability to communicate, their dispositions. Do they get angry too quickly? How do they work with their colleagues? So we put at least 100 students on professional improvement plans every semester, and some of them we actually encourage to finish their degree in another area.
Shall I respond to that, Stephen?
Yes, of course.
We certainly have strong entrance requirements. Our students at the University of Michigan are already, it's a selective institution, so by the time they apply to enter our programs, which I meant to mention are both undergraduate and we have post-baccalaureate programs as well, but we do have standards that relate to their prior academic performance and the kinds of experiences they've had. However, you may have been able to infer from what I said that we are intent on specifying much more clearly what the exit standards are from initial teacher training. That is, given that we need a wide range of people to enter teaching, and teaching has always been a wide entry profession, but what it has never done is actually, as I said earlier, specify clearly what one has to know how to do before one exits training and begins the process of actually teaching students and continuing to develop. So we think exit requirements are more important actually at this point in America than entry requirements.
I agree. Oh, I was just saying, I agree with Deborah, which is why we are using the teacher assessment performance in all of our sites, whether they're grant funded or not. And so we both agree.
Deborah, are those in place yet at U of Michigan?
I'm sorry?
Are the exit requirements in place yet at University of Michigan?
They're increasingly in place. We now have at the end of each of the stages of the program assessments that we're using that are culminating. And last year when we began that, we had students who were not able to meet those standards. Some of those have left the program. Some of those got additional help before they were then asked to pass those again. And our goal will be that interns will be able to try the assessments more than once, but that a couple of times, as in our medical school and other professional schools, will not be allowed to continue to repeat those if they can't meet them on the second time.
So our next question has to do with getting buy-in from faculty. I mean, as we know, teacher education has faculty with lots of different opinions about whether specific teaching practices should be incorporated into the program, and basically what the structure of these programs should look like. So the question we have is, how did you develop buy-in for your approaches from faculty, local teachers, and administrators, especially with regard to some of these new changes that you've made?
Well, we've been very fortunate here at the University of Michigan that this the redesign that I've been describing has been centrally developed by the tenure track and clinical faculty. We haven't had a separate faculty working on this, and both groups of our faculty who really work together all the time have a great deal of experience in practice. And the buy-in here, it's not even quite the right question because they're the ones who have redeveloped it. It was a problem that we decided as a faculty to take on, and those people who work in K-12 teacher education, which is a big fraction of our faculty, are the ones who've both done the early design work and are currently doing the implementation work and the leadership of it. So there is a lot to learn about the fact that we've agreed, for example, on having common curricula here, on working on syllabi together. People don't develop their own approach to each of the things that we're teaching. When I work on the Managing to Teach module, which we teach at several different points across the program, I and the other people who work on that agree on the syllabus, and we teach the same activities, the same practices. We use the same assessments, and that's very different than what is typical in higher education. However, given that we're a professional school, we considered that together to be exactly what would have to happen.
We're building an infrastructure that allows for the different syllabi to be the same, because remember, we're teaching these courses in tribal lands and the Navajo Nation. I mean, we're teaching them a mile away from where the campus is. And so the idea that there's going to be a lot of different sections taught by TAs and faculty associates, clinical faculty, and tenure track faculty. So we have course coordinators who bring those groups together from the field and tenure track to decide what the skeleton of that syllabus is like. And then, of course, individual teachers add their own flair and add their own importance as well. But there are some things that are non-negotiable. We use this teacher assessment performance, and that has to be integrated into that syllabus. What I find, and one of the grants we've called together community colleges. We get a lot of kids who transfer from community colleges. We can't ignore that. What are they learning, and how is that? And what courses are they teaching in the community college that will transfer to our program? And then we have kids who enter as freshmen. So what content courses are they taking? Part of teacher ed, and what education courses? And so we have a lot of different ways to split this up, but the bottom line is that there have to be constituents from the external partnerships, community colleges, schools, internal partnerships, arts and science and faculty of education, and internal to the college, clinical faculty as well as tenure track faculty. And they don't always agree, which makes a great agenda.
Our next question digs a little bit deeper into candidate performance assessment. And so this question has to do with how do you train both students and faculty to understand the expectations of these performance assessments. So at the University of Michigan, they've been developed there, and at ASU using the Teacher Advancement Program rubric. How have you made sure that everyone understands what the performance framework looks like, and that when you go out to observe student teachers or review their work, there's going to be a common expectation there?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we built the assessments together, so that's step one, and the rubrics together. That was joint work by the faculty, graduate students, and others who work in the program. But I think an important step that I observed us engaged in that I think was very important is in the first round of the culminating performance assessments, we dedicated an entire day in which we sat and actually went through the performances of the students. One of the examples was a video-based example where students had to produce a video of themselves carrying out a set of routines in their classroom. This was a first-year assessment. And we sat together and scored the assessments using the rubric, and it was an enormous moment of learning for all of us. So I think just as teachers in schools learn from working together on scoring young people's assessments, I think the faculty at the University of Michigan have both designed these assessments and learned to develop and to use them through our collegial work together. And that goes back to your previous question about buy-in. This has been a very important decision we made as a faculty. This would be one of a small set of important priorities of the School of Education, to build these assessments and learn to do them. So it's not trivial to get to what you just said, and it has grown out of deliberate face-to-face and interactive work with one another.
So for us, it's professional development, ongoing professional development, peeling layers of an onion, finding out more and more what this means. So the initial training is 3 days that faculty, any clinical person has to have the TAP preparation, professional development. Something like 75 tenured faculty have also gone for it, because they want to be able to integrate it into their course. Because an assessment at the end of the program is irrelevant unless the tools are being given to students throughout the entire program. And so we have just done huge amounts of accessible, professional, ongoing professional development and coaching. And that means that the schools we're working with, many of their teachers are assessing each other with the same exact assessment performance. So that's why the districts want to hire our students. They understand it, they know it, they've been through it. And it's ongoing. We do a lot of these. We do 5 a semester of these observations. We videotape. Every student teacher has to buy a flip camera. Those flip cameras, they have to tag small 2-3 minutes and share them together with their entire class, with their coordinator. They look at those snippets together of themselves teaching, which show different assessments on their assessment performance. I went to a presentation of students at the end of last year, and I was blown away by their ability to be flexible in their thinking of why they did it, why they didn't do this, and why they succeeded and why they didn't succeed. Because the issue is the talking it through. It isn't whether they're going to be, excellent or not. The issue is whether they understand what was going on when they were doing it. So I think it just takes a huge amount of professional development and preparation for the students.
I just wanted to make a comment about videotaping. We've also found huge power in having the interns own flip cameras, and they all now have libraries of examples of their practice that they're saving, that they collect on a routine basis as they're in their different placements. The performance assessments, however, ask them to produce examples of very specific practices. For example, one at the end of the first year assessments required them to create a video in which we could see how well they gave directions in their field placement and how they organized students to make transitions between activities, and then the rubric scored them on that. So although we are interested in their ability to explain what they did, we have tried to shift our assessments more toward their actual ability to do the work and the quality of those enactments, because we were struck with the fact, and I don't know that this responds exactly to what you were just saying, Mary, but that teacher education had become replete with more examples of reflection and analysis than actual performance. So we have tried to make our assessments very rigorously about whether they actually carried out, they gave directions well, and the students were able to follow them, not just did they do it and then tell us what they did wrong with it.
Yeah.
Formatively, that's important, but for the culminating assessments, we have wanted them to actually do them at a level of quality that we've agreed upon and that we've showed them that they need to meet.
And that's the advantage of this TAP, is that it has validity and reliability, and of course they have to be able to, not just, but I also want to say, it's also building a longitudinal data system, which we've had to do for these grants. It's not just at that exit performance. It's what they're doing in school, how we measure through retention, through student achievement, various measures of how they do once they leave the university. I mean, this is something that will be on every teacher ed program. Do they stay in? What kind of colleagues are there? And so the final performance assessment is whether their kids are reaching, their own students in K through 12 are reaching their own potential in schools. That's the piece part of that we have to own as well. And I think that's what we're going to get better and better at, because that's actually what people want to know, not the exit, not the exit from the college, but the entrance into the profession. And the other thing in response to what Deborah's saying is colleges of education have to build these infrastructures and systems that exist and persist beyond a dean who's a reformer or beyond faculty who want to do it. And so I think what we've also come to realize is that these have to be systematic changes in colleges, in my college. And without the systematic change, this will go the way many other things have gone. And so part of my job, I feel, is setting up the systems and the schools' expectations, our partner schools, of what we pledge to do on an ongoing basis in order to prepare people who will be ready to teach in their schools. So I think the infrastructure is equally important. It isn't even individual students. It's actually aggregate, how they're going to impact schools as well.
Thank you both for those answers. They're very specific. We have gotten a lot of questions right now about mentor teachers. So these are actual practicing classroom teachers that agree to take a student teacher or a candidate into their classroom. And the question is, do your colleges have protocols for enrolling these mentor teachers or cooperating teachers, as they're sometimes called? Do you publish enforceable guidelines regarding what they should be demonstrating and how they should be supporting their student teachers?
We have a variety of ways in which we work with mentor teachers. So in the clinical rounds that I described earlier, our secondary teacher educators have deliberately selected teachers who are particularly skilled at specific high-leverage practices or aspects of teaching that they want the teacher interns to be learning, and that's why they travel in rounds to visit those classrooms and spend time over a period of days learning about how those teachers enact those practices. Other mentor teachers are the ones who allow interns to practice with them in their classrooms, and in which our interns stay for periods of weeks while they're working with that teacher. So we have different mentor teachers who are working in different ways, and we're quite selective about how we select people to work in the program. And as Mary said, we engage them in thinking with us about exactly how to focus our interns' opportunities to learn.
We have focused on partnerships with districts. So we don't go in and dictate to a district who our student teachers should be with, but we say, and they have to go through this training that we require. But because we have two people on site all the time, we evaluate mentor teachers on an ongoing basis as we evaluate student teachers. They're not separate entities, really. They're working together in classrooms. When we begin to see things go off, or when we begin, they come back and talk to the coordinators here about what's going on in that classroom. Is that the best teacher? Is that the best principal? Is that the best school district? And unless there's that, we feel unless the district, the principal and the teacher buy into what we're trying to do, it is not a marriage made in heaven, I can tell you. So we work with them on an ongoing basis. If the mentor teacher isn't what we think is good to begin with, we work with them. If it doesn't work, we've got to change, sometimes out of the school. So we feel this is an investment together in developing a culture of preparing people that we will do together. The individual classroom may not count as much as the culture of the school, the responsibility and respect given to the student teacher and our program and what we're trying to do. And so we feel these are relationships, solid, deep relationships we need to build with districts. In the beginning, districts were saying to us, maybe not. Maybe we don't want all these student teachers. Maybe they're now in line, waiting in line, because they see the impact this can have on instruction. This is value added to any school, any district, because we're there and our students are good. So we have actually tried to do this and are doing this a different way, not just in the selection process, but in the together creating a culture of educating, future teachers.
So we have time for one more question, and this one is about accreditation. How much do you use NCATE guidelines or another accreditor's guidelines to help guide the design of your teacher preparation program?
Well, we are a TIAC institution, and TIAC involves us in identifying specifically what we're trying to accomplish and collecting evidence about the success or lack of success and our ability to achieve that. And that process fits well for the fact that we've stepped way out and have been developing what we consider to be a practice-based orientation to the curriculum and clinical experience and assessment of teachers. So that, coupled with the Michigan Department of Education standards, have been global guidelines for us. But because all of those sorts of guidelines are so much vaguer than what we've decided to do, we map between our high-leverage practices and the specific content requirements of our program and those more global goals, and we're able to demonstrate to the accrediting body and to the state that we are meeting those. But to be honest, those professional standards and state and governmental standards have tended to be much less specific than what we're arguing are needed.
We are neither NCATE nor TIAC approved. I really want, I think unless accreditation is value added, I'm not sure why we would use a lot of resources to do it. I resonate with what Deborah's saying. We use INTAS standards, we use the standards the state gives. Of course, we're aware, go to ACT. I was on the Board of Examiners for NCATE. I'm aware of those standards, but I will not be hijacked by them. I simply won't be anymore. I'm too old. I've been doing this too long. I'm going to use them, and my faculty and my leadership team will use them in ways that we think make sense in the culture of this state, in the culture of this university with our students. And quite frankly, I think that we aspire to be more. That's like to make sure you're okay or you're good, but we want to really kick you know what. I can't say it on the radio.
I do think, though, that I don't want to imply that I think professional standards are vital. So I think that what we want as a profession is to grow a set of professional standards that teachers and teacher educators and people who care about the quality of schooling will say are the appropriate level of standards to ensure that programs actually do prepare people for the demands of teaching practice. So I think there are many people in this country concerned with this right now, and Teaching Works, our new organization, and the University of Michigan are concerned with working as a nation to change this because, in fact, the education tradition here has been highly individual, and although right now I'm describing some things that we're doing, our intention is not to somehow, define ourselves separately from everyone else. We're hoping, and we're already seeing many signs of this, of working together across the country to change the nature of teacher preparation. So the next time you have a webinar like this 10 years from now, I don't have to start it by saying we have the teacher preparation has a weak impact and teaching quality remains weak. We think we can really build a system by creating shared standards that are related to the quality of practice.
And I think what Deborah's saying, I know Deborah, she and I had coffee together at a conference because we want to learn from each other. And I'm not sure of the role anymore of an accreditation board in between. Many deans of colleges of education actually do talk to each other, do see the practices we respect, we can adopt. And hopefully at some point we'll begin to do research together. So in my perspective, I think it's this kind of collaboration with people, open people like Deborah, open people, there's many. Deans, I've been in lately in Washington for 2 of these meetings that will actually help us more immediately understand what to do, how to do it. I see less the role of formal organizations and only it being a one-way street. We learn from them, and there isn't some ongoing, really quick, in-time action.
So we're at the end of our hour. There's just a few things I want to wrap up on. First, if you're interested in hearing more about the work that Mary and Deborah are doing, our technical person, Ross, is going to put up a slide with links to a few stories and items that I've written. And, of course, we will be continuing to follow teacher education and the changes in the field here at Education Week. Finally, I want to offer a big thanks to both Mary and Deborah for graciously sharing their time with us today, to thank all of you for joining us and asking such good, on-point questions. And as I mentioned earlier, an archive of the discussion and of the PowerPoint slides will be available at www.edweek.org within 24 hours. Thanks again for joining us, and goodbye.